Welcome to the Closer's Inner Circle podcast. Today we are diving back into the truly remarkable journey of Ben Gay III. He is a true legend in the world of sales and personal development, and Ben stands as the last protege of Dr. Napoleon Hill, who was a prominent American self-help author, best known for his influential book Think and Grow Rich, which is considered one of the best-selling self-help books of all time. And his writings focus on the principles of success and personal achievement, emphasizing the power of positive thinking and the importance of a definite purpose in life. Now, Ben's incredible career began at Holiday Magic. We talked about that last week, where he worked alongside other sales giants like Earl Nightingale and Zig Ziglar and many others. And at just 25 years old, Ben became president of what was then the world's largest direct sales and network marketing company, and he has a legacy of sales mastery. His contributions to sales trainings are monumental. His book series, The Closers, has become a cornerstone of professional selling, also known as the Sales Bibles, with over 10.5 million copies sold worldwide. Good morning, Ben. It's Wednesday. It's the end of the year for us. And I hate to even say this, but this is going to be our final chat for the year. And then we're going to jump back in the new year and kick some hiney.
I'll look forward to that. Hard to believe the year has gone by that quickly. I'm still getting used to writing 2024, and now it's gone. I think 2025 will be easier to remember and lock in because it's a more specific number. It's like somebody was complaining the other day that at the anniversary of the assassination of uh, President Kennedy, there was little said about it. But that's because it wasn't the 60th or 70th or whatever anniversary of the killing. Same thing with Pearl Harbor this year. I don't think I heard it mentioned more than once or twice. And as I may have told you, there were my father said, two horrible things that happened on December 7th, 1941. One, the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor. And speaking of Earl Nightingale, he was on the Arizona when it was hit. He and I think it was 19, a contingent of 19 Marines were on board the Arizona. So when we had a boating accident on San Francisco Bay one time, he was there and Dr. Hill was there. And I said, Earl, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? And he said, Ben, pardon my French, but this is what he said. He was from that era. He said, Ben, if the Japs couldn't get me at Pearl Harbor, Ben Gay can't get me on San Francisco Bay. So he survived the experience. And the other horrible thing my father said happened on December 7th, 1941, because the war broke out and Dad was in the Navy and he'd go back to his station and so on. And he and Mother thought they might never see each other again, and that the line in his family would stop. They made love, and I was conceived on December 7th, 1941. So those were the two horrible things, Pearl Harbor and me, that my father moaned about till the day he died. The but
It's very, you're a rare person who can pin down the date and the time practically when you were
well, you can
conceived.
if it
Yeah,
happens on Pearl Harbor Day,
I
yeah,
reckon you can.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
And why?
you're leaving to go back to your naval base that afternoon. You could probably pin it down to the hour. But anyway, he always, anytime 20 or more people gathered together, Dad would say, "Do you guys know what happened on December 7th?" And I would go, "Here we go again. The two worst things that ever happened to America, Pearl Harbor and Ben Gay." But it was fun and made a great story. And Earl, it took me a while, a couple of meetings after I found out, to grasp the significance of what he went through. He was somewhere in the upper structure, the superstructure of the Arizona, and would not have lived except the Arizona listed before it went down, meaning Earl was able to drop from wherever he was directly into the water instead of onto the deck. And that was the only reason that you and I ever heard of Earl Nightingale, because he was just a young Marine on a boat. And like the other 2 or 3 thousand people killed that day, we wouldn't know them unless we were related to them. So small world in many ways. Would you like me to pick up so where we were last week, the
Yes.
last edition? Okay.
Yes, please, because that was a fascinating conversation and that hour wasn't enough. So I am going to get out of your way, mostly, and I'm going to let you go. You just tell everybody what's on your mind.
Stay tuned in because I'll probably ask you a few things as we go along, or hope that you comment. Denise, for the listeners, Denise is not feeling well today. She has a cold, and she thinks she sounds worse than she does. I can't tell the difference. She sounds fine, but that's the reason she's going to give me a little free time. So, at Holiday Magic, if you were
That,
with
and
us,
it's the end of the year, and you are the great Ben Gay the third, and I feel like I need to just get out of your way for a little while. Did that sound sincere?
yeah, not
Oh,
really, but yeah.
no, no, sincerity costs extra, just so you know. Okay, keep going.
As someone used to say, as soon as you know how to fake sincerity, you got it made. So I think we've all been in that position from time to time. Wrapping up on last week, or the last edition, I was with Holiday Magic Cosmetics. Denise sort of laid that out. It became the largest MLM direct sales company in the world. And I was president of it when I became president when I was 25, which led to Denise and I were talking privately a few days ago. She said, how did you meet Dr. Hill? How did he come into your life?" And I never discussed it with him or William Penpatrick, the owner of Holiday Magic Cosmetics, uh, directly. But I think a factor was Dr. Hill was out to give Bill Patrick some award, and having to do with being one of the five greatest people in the world at the time, or something like that, in a book that he had written. So that put him in the building. And then somewhere between the back of the building where Bill Patrick's office was and the front of the building, as he was walking Dr. Hill out, they swung by my office. But before they got there, Bill said something to the effect of, "I've got a young man who's doing a great job, etc. But I'm sure there are times when he has questions or concerns and he doesn't want to make the long walk down to my office and confess that he doesn't know what he should do at that time." So, long story short, he and Dr. Hill, walking down the hall, made an agreement that the company would pay Dr. Hill $50,000 for a year. And keep in mind, this is a long time ago, uh, the equivalent of about a $500,000 today. Uh, he would pay him $50,000 for a year of Dr. Hill and I used to kid, of being my friend. I'm not sure we used at first the term coaching or mentoring or whatever, but he hired a grandfather for me, and biologically, Dr. Hill was old enough to be my great grandfather on the day we met. I was 25, he was 84, I think, with about 2.5 years to go. So that's how we hooked up. To the end of Holiday
I,
Magic for me,
well,
we got,
I have to interrupt now.
uh-huh.
For some reason, I never knew this story until it just popped out of my head the other day when we were talking offline. And I just assumed that because you were 25 years old, that you had no, I mean, I think you told me you had a high school diploma. I mean, you landed in this massive company and made it even bigger. And I just assumed incorrectly that they thought you needed help and they went and found Dr. Napoleon Hill and hired him. Turns out it was a serendipity thing.
Yeah, it really was, as best I know. And
Right.
I said, Bill never told me anything different. Dr. Hill never said anything. All I knew was he was in the building to give Bill Patrick a signed copy of the book he had written that mentioned Bill and an award, a plaque. I don't know what it said on it, but I remember the picture with the plaque between them. And I think heading for the front door, it was serendipity. The conversation turned. He wasn't there to be hired for me, but Bill was sort of impulsive like I am, and the thought crossed his mind, and all of a sudden, Dr. Hill and I were on the verge of being the best of buddies. And he was so kind and gracious to me. And we had some differences between us. He didn't expect you to sit there and be passive. For instance, his most famous phrase comes from Think and Grow Rich, where he says, whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve. And when he repeated that to me at our very first lunch, I think I've told you he was putting a bite of salad in his mouth, and he said it and then continued on to open his mouth for the lettuce. And I said, unless he's crazy. And
I
that,
remember that.
yeah, it became our second fight. First fight, friendly, of course, was when I said, Dr. Hill, it's a pleasure to meet you. He said, call me Nappy. And I said, never. You're a senior to me. I'm a Southerner. You're Dr. Hill. That word will never come out of my mouth. And it didn't even in storytelling until he died. Then I would tell people that he wanted to be called Nappy. I just couldn't bring myself to today, 54, 55 years after he died, I'm uncomfortable telling you that because my generation doesn't call their grandfathers and great grandfathers anything. You know, that somebody said, what was your senior teacher, English teacher's first name? I said, my teachers didn't have first names. It was Miss or Ms. or what Mrs. whatever it was in style at the time, and or Mr. And that was it. If they had a first name, they never told me what it was, nor did I ask. So it's just a generational uh, thing. I don't mind being called Ben by little kids, but every time I hear it, I think, a little bit of society has slipped away until I give them permission. Adults in meetings tend to call me Mr. Gay. And as soon as they do, if I'm shaking their hand, I say, call me Ben.
And it's
But
a Southern thing too, Ben,
yeah,
as you and I
it
both
is.
know.
Yeah.
If I run into anybody in the grocery store and they know me or at least think they know me, it's, hey, Miss Denise, how are you? I'm good. How are you,
Yep.
Miss or Mister?
Right.
It's Southern. That's just the way we operate.
Good manners might be another word for it. But yeah. So anyway, that's how I became head of Holiday Magic. And then uh, we had a spin-off company, subsidiary, motor oil additive company, a vitamin company, a home care cleaning product company, clothing company, etc. And each person who brought that idea to us was getting a percentage of the deal. I was being paid very well, but I was signing checks to people who worked for me that were making more than me. So I said to Bill one day, um, I want one of those 10% deals. And he said, well, create a company. So I got out my thesaurus and I've been leading seminars and teaching groups how to work together as teams for the whole time I've been with the company. So I started looking up uh, names that I thought would be good for what I had in mind, which was a seminar company that people would pay a good deal of money to come to for a week or so. I think it was 10 days. And the I wanted it to be part of the company in that if you wanted to move up in Holiday Magic, I expected you to graduate from it and then pretty quick the other one. It was called Leadership Dynamics Institute. And soon my 10%, I think it was 2,500 to attend it. That would be 25,000 today. Soon my royalties on Leadership Dynamics exceed, in addition to the good we were doing, the work we were doing with the attendees, it exceeded what I was making as president of Holiday Magic. So I liked that. And then one day, Bill and I were talking, and he just read a book called The Sleeping Prophet. Uh, authors, that escapes my mind, but he's famous. Edgar Casey wrote The Sleeping Prophet, and Bill said, I think there's another seminar company in this book. Read it and see what you think. Long story short, somewhat, we started Mind Dynamics Institute, which was between LDI and MDI combined. They were the forerunners of the modern human potential personal development business. MDI, in particular, for instance, was where Werner Erhard started. He was an instructor, left us to go start EST and then the Forum. And then there are companies like LifeSpring and PSI who all came off of that. Every single one of those companies was founded by somebody who attended both LDI and or MDI seminars. And that became, although Holiday Magic tied up most of my day all day, those two became a major part of my income and hold a warm spot in my heart to this day. I meet people on a regular basis on the phone, in person, on the internet, who mark their lives by pre-LDI and post-LDI. That was when their life turned around. MDI a little bit less, but the impact. Uh, Somebody described LDI, leadership dynamics, as Tony Robbins meets the Navy SEALs. It was, oh, not only when I said 10 days, it just dawned on me. It was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, almost 5 days. But what was unique about the 5 days was it was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, meaning no sleep, eat K rations at your seat. And so you, except for going to the bathroom, you never left the meeting room, and the bathroom was attached. So it was somewhat grueling, but life-changing. And for me, besides being life-changing, a great deal of money flowed in, and in some ways still flows in that I have contacts I made then that are still in my circle of influence and dear friends. And I rarely talk to them. That LDI or MDI doesn't come up, and the effects they made in their life. So that was sort of at the same time Holiday Magic was going on, but almost another chapter in my life. And then Bill and I, we got it up to $1 million a day. In today's money, that's about 3.5 billion. And Bill standing in my office one day, and he said, "We got to make more money." And I said, "Sure." Always trying to increase sales. But I said, "We're taking in $1 million a day, and we're selling cosmetics, which are high markup items. You might sell something for $50 that costs you $1, cap, jar, labeling, contents, everything. And in the seminars, you're selling time and air. There was no product. So what do we need more money for?" Well, what it was his hobbies. We had a 3,500 acre ranch up at Clear Lake, California. We had as I was leaving, we acquired a Gulfstream airplane. Before that, simultaneously, we had a Learjet back when they were unique and novel. And we had 40 some other airplanes, some at the airport that we ran. We had a Cessna dealership. Um, and some of them served a purpose. They were used in flight training and so on. But the expensive ones were all Bill's hobbies. We had the only flying B-29 in the world. The Fertile Myrtle was the one that dropped Chuck Yeager out of its belly when he broke the sound barrier for the first time. He used to come down and visit it from time to time. We had a P-51 World War II fighter plane, the same one Bill was killed in up at the ranch, oddly enough. And and then we had a 120-foot, I think it was, yacht in Sausalito, plus several other boats, but a substantial yacht. John Davidson, the singer, bought it later on and wrote a book about it called The Principia. And so we had lots of things going out the door that had nothing to do with cosmetics. When we were getting ready to take the company public, one of the underwriters said, and we got to get rid of all those airplanes. And Bill's back stiffened. He said, no, I don't want to get rid of my airplanes. He said, they're not your airplanes. They're about to be part of a public company. And a cosmetic company does not need an air force, which I sort of thought made sense. End result was we didn't go public, which cost me about $40 million right there that
He wouldn't
day.
go public because he wouldn't give up his airplanes?
Yeah, and two or three other things. The ranch is your personal
Right,
property,
right.
so we'll just move that over to you and
They
you'll
couldn't have
pay.
restructured that and put it into a trust or
Well,
something?
there's all sorts of things you could do, but
Right.
Bill was very stubborn about
Okay.
things.
You've told me that before.
Yeah, he said one time we were negotiating with the SEC or the FTC or somebody about some problem they had with our marketing plan. And the lawyers were there. Meeting was in my office, and finally Bill said, "All right, enough of this." And he stood up. He was an imposing figure. Stood up, red faced, shaking, and he said, "The next person who utters the word compromise will be fired. Get out of here." So everybody got up and left. Door shuts. It's just Bill and me there, and he looked at me like, "How was that?" He thought it was a good performance. And I said, "Compromise." And he dropped his head and he said, "You son of a, whatever." And I
You
said, "That
weren't fired, I take it.
no, that was for show. I think if somebody else been stupid enough to do it in front of the group, they would have been fired. But in private, he and I could talk about just about anything. So uh, the Bill said, "We got to make more money." And I said, "Bill, I don't know how to make more money other than normal growth, hold more meetings, go out and do bigger things without lying, cheating, and stealing, and which you taught me not to do." In the company film, I hear it quoted all the time, but it was me spontaneously while doing a stand-up part of that movie, recruiting film. I said, if honesty didn't exist, someone should invent it as the best way of getting rich. It certainly worked for me. And then the camera goes dum 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 dum, it backs up, and me in the driveway turns into me in the driveway and my big Saint Bernard and the American flag on a 40-foot pole in the front yard, San Francisco Bay all around us, and a rather large home. And so I said, you taught me lying, cheating, and stealing is not a good idea. And he said, well, Ben, give it some thought, because if you won't lie, cheat, and steal, I'll get somebody who will. And I thought that was sort of like compromise, like that would, go away. And it didn't. And we had an international convention coming up, and I'm sitting in the front of the room with all the executives getting ready to go to the first meeting at the convention. And Bill says, "I have an announcement to make. I'm going to be doing less in the company." I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist of it. And we're going to put in leadership that will take us to greater heights and so on. And I remember uncrossing my legs. If you have your legs crossed, one leg might go to sleep. When I was introduced and I stood up, I didn't want my leg to be asleep. So I straightened my jacket and got ready. And he said, "And now the official new leader of Holiday Magic and all of our related companies, Roland Nocera." And he came up the steps. He's dead now, so we can talk openly about him. Roland was a wannabe mafia guy from Chicago,
I-
and he had just taken over what had sort of been my job. It wasn't official. Bill and I ran it as co-equals, but he brought in Roland. That was the guy who would lie, cheat, and steal. I had a warning a week or two before that, a guy named Abe Solomon, who owned a local bank, and he owned Silky Sullivan. For you horse people among us, that was the horse that used to get 25 lengths behind and then win the race. He had him in retirement. And Abe came up to my house unannounced. I didn't even know he knew where I lived, and knocked on the door. And I said, Abe, how are you? He said, fine, got something we got to talk about. Uh, he said, Bill's very concerned that you're not making enough money. I said, well, let me tell you what I told him. We're making $1 million a day, taking in $1 million a day, and we have plenty of money if it wasn't going out through the hole in the bottom of the bucket, the ranch, the yachts, the this, the that, so on. And Abe said, I know, but I heard you're not willing to lie, cheat, and steal, and I want you to know he's going to get somebody who will. Well, it turned out that was Roland and Osara. And so that was the first day of the convention. After that was over, Roland asked me to meet him in his room. He was staying in a hotel. I went up and he said, I want you to go to Canada and save that company. It's in bad shape and so on. And I've told you, Bill had a habit of shipping people. When he was going to fire him, he'd ship them to some other country or some other place or some other assignment. And then in due time, they were gone. And I missed that point when I went to Canada. I thought, Bill, you say float them out over the horizon where they can't be seen and then sink their boat. So I'd forgotten that I was being shipped off to Canada. And 91 days later, it went from exile to being fired. I was released from the company that had been my life for quite some time and remains an important part of my memories and my learning and so on. And then, due to the course they set off on, the lawsuits started coming. I really believe Bill was looking at prison, certainly multi-million-dollar fines. The IRS was after him, the SEC was after him, and so on. And flying recklessly up at the ranch one day in the P-51, he plowed it into the hillside with the head of our Scandinavian operations in the jump seat behind him. So they both were killed. And I think within a year or so of that, it was over, bankrupt, uh, like it gone with the wind, as we say in the South. And that was the end of that company. But I had led it up to about 2 years before that, and a personal experience that I haven't had before or since. It was really, when it was good, it was very good. When it was bad, it could get rather rough, and sometime in a future call, maybe we'll spend some time on that. But one guy, the previous president of the company, when he figured out he was going to be removed and replaced with me, came in with a gun to kill me. And head of the mailroom, a guy named Harold Combs, came into my office. He had been sitting here quietly, do not come out no matter what you hear. And a minute or so later, I heard a gunshot. I'm not such a gun guy that I knew that for a fact, but I didn't know what else a loud bang in the office might be, and scuffling and so on as people were wrestling the gun away from him. And he said to me later, because we wound up not friends, but talking again. I said, Fred, were you really going to kill me? He says, probably that day, yeah. But he said, I only fired into the ceiling of his office. And I said, yeah, on your level, you fired into the accounting department. He said, oh yeah, I guess I didn't think about that. You're sitting in accounting, balancing books, and all of a sudden the floor before you erupts, and then the ceiling above you, and there's gunfire in the building. And they firebombed my car through railroad flares into my brand new Cadillac. I saw it on fire down by the Safeway store beneath my house. My wife at the time, Marcia, now gone, had taken the car down while she was in the store shopping. Part of that element, that gang, threw 2 or 3 railroad flares into the back seat, and had a knock at the door one day, opened it, And there stood a bunch of people. I didn't know the terms in those days, but they were in bomb protection outfits, head to toe, looking at me through visors. And they said, Mr. Gay, we've had credible reason to believe there's a bomb or more in your house. So I helped them look for it. I said, I'm not coming off this hill, go down and have them see me leave, saying, we ran him out of his house. So I helped him look for it. It turned out it was a bluff. It wasn't true. Uh, but I did get Marcia and my son out of there, and they went down. So I call it the Wild West of multi-level marketing of that industry, in that the way it happened was you have a lot of people. I was raised around money. I didn't have any when I joined the business, but I was raised around it. We belonged to East Lake Country Club in Atlanta, Bobby Jones home course. That was 2 blocks down the street from my house. And we had belonged there, counting aunts and uncles. We'd belonged there almost 100 years since its founding. So I wasn't impressed with money, because people I played golf with were the chairman of the board of Coca-Cola, the founders of Home Depot, etc., and people that were bigger deals than that. But if you take money that and throw it at people who've had none and weren't raised to be around it and don't know how to handle it, the wheels can come off the wagon. Bill, although he was a college graduate, came from an uneducated family in a dirt farm in Roper, North Carolina. And then he was involved in a couple of other companies. But when he started Holiday Magic, basically he had to borrow the money from his mother-in-law to buy the inventory, about $12,000. He had zero money. And 3 years later, his personal wealth was estimated at 40 some odd $1 million. That brings on the yachts and the Gulf Streams and the 3,500-acre ranch and things like that, and drags along people with it. Uh, a favorite, I'll leave him unnamed, although he's also dead, a favorite of mine, one of my early mentors and instrumental in me joining the business, and in Zig Ziglar joining the business. The highest thing he'd ever achieved was he was a dance instructor for Arthur Murray in North Carolina. He went from that to tons of money and vice president of this and vice president of that and so on. And he didn't know how to handle it. That's when the Cadillacs show up and the tailor-made suits and all, and they have their place for recruiting and impressing other people. But mainly they were getting it because they'd always wanted something like that. And now they could get it. But with it, it's like when people win the lottery. I really believe there should be a requirement that you have to go to money handling school run by Charles Schwab or Vanguard or somebody, and maybe have some restrictions put on your winnings for a year or two so you don't blow it. Because we've all heard the stories, he won $50 million and now he's bankrupt.
Oh, I had neighbors like that. They
Yeah,
won a ton of money and lost every penny of it
yep.
and made our
And
lives hell while they were doing it.
and probably more than that. I suspect they wound up in debt, because it's sort of hard to know
I hope they
when
did.
your
They were
plan
terrible
isn't working.
people.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were awful people. They really
Yeah. I
were.
won the lottery. I'm going to buy my mother a house and my
Yep.
brother a house and
Yeah.
everybody I've ever met a car. Sort of the Elvis Presley syndrome. I thought Elvis
Yeah.
was a great performer, but he was too much money too fast, no supervision. I
Yeah.
was reading
Yeah.
something about him this morning where he'd given away 300 expensive cars. Well, when he died, do you know how much his estate was? People were thinking it would be the largest estate ever settled in Tennessee. $2 million.
Right. I remember it was surprisingly small, and
Yeah,
Priscilla had to step in and take
save it.
control to salvage it. And she
Yeah.
wasn't even married to him anymore, but she had their daughter.
Yeah, if it weren't for Graceland, which is what
Right.
she used as the tool, the lever to turn it around, it would have been even worse than it was. So that's sort of the holiday magic story. Ended on a bad note, although Bill and I stayed in touch. We had to meet at a little restaurant in San Rafael to have lunch that nobody ever went to. It was a diner, not a very good one, and sit in the back. So we continued talking civilly. But in the meantime, he and I were battling. He owed me, I don't know, 40 million, 50 million, I've forgotten, in stock and benefits and overrides and so on. I remember one,
You would bother to talk with him and you just explained it to me because I would not have,
yeah.
unless or until he owed me a crap ton of money. Then I would have conversations. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. So anyway, it was an interesting time. One month, I remember, I don't think it was every month, but I remember one month my legal bills to my two attorney firms totaled $86,000 for a month to legal firms. And I'm sure Bill was spending a similar amount. We had an in-house law firm at Holiday Magic, so maybe it wasn't quite that big a sting, but we wound up beating each other over the heads with our wallets until we were both broke, basically. Not just because of that, but lack of income, lawsuits, etc. And it ended. I don't remember. I keep saying I'm going to memorize it, but the last sentence, I believe it is, "Gone with the wind." Talk about this glorious life, and then boom, it was gone. And so was that. So I'm now sitting in the big house, drained of a lot of money, and but still alive, and got the house and some nice cars and money in the bank. And I was trying to decide, what do you do next? I thought about retiring. Well, I was 30 years old, just a little over 30. Retirement seemed sort of silly, but I did slow down. I used to tell people I was retired, but the truth is I was still doing consulting and so on. But I'm thinking, what's the next chapter in my life? So I had this big house surrounded by 156 acres right on San Francisco Bay, looking at the San Rafael Richmond Bridge where it tucks when it lands in Marin County. It tucks behind a hill, which prevented me from seeing San Quentin. If the hill wasn't there, my view would have been San Quentin State Prison. And but there was a smokestack sticking up from the prison, which was just sort of interesting part of the skyline. And I'm sitting there in my office looking around, not doing a whole lot, looking at that smokestack. And I said, "What are you going to do next?" And I said, "San Quentin. Uh, I bet they could use my seminars." So I thought, who do I know that would get me in front of the right people? Well, there was a wonderful gentleman named Margot Margosian, and he had the Marvelous Marin Breakfast Club. He knew everybody that was anybody. So I called him and I said, "Margot, this is Ben Gay." I'd spoken at his club and been to a few of the breakfasts. I said, "This is Ben Gay, and I have a plan for doing a series of seminars in prisons, starting with San Quentin. Do you know anybody at San Quentin?" He said, "Sure. I know the warden, Red Nelson, good friend, member of the club." And I said, "Well, how do I get in front of him?" He said, "When do you want to get in front of him?" And I said, "Anytime this week, for instance." And he said, "Let me put you on hold." And he was gone 5 minutes, and he came back. He said, "You're meeting with him Thursday morning," whatever. And so I drove through the gates of San Quentin for what it turned out to be the first of hundreds of times over the next 5 years. And I created a seminar company called People Builders. And obvious reasons, but it fit what I had been doing for a long time, and trying to build people and give them a better life and so on. So I went over to the prison and said to the warden, "Okay, here's the deal." He said, "Oh, Margot's told me all about you. We want to work with you. How can you help us? How can we help you?" So I laid out this thing about weekly meetings and so on. And he said, "Well, they have jobs during the day." And I said, "Well, why don't I come in at 5, 6 o'clock on a Friday night and stay till 5 or 6 o'clock Saturday morning, and for 12 hours there'll be a lot." It was sort of sounded like leadership dynamics. for 12 hours they'll be locked in the prison. I just don't need them going back to their self accounts and everything. He said, no, we'll just lock them down. They'll count them in the room. That's not a problem. He said, so how much is this? How much is it going to cost me? And I forget the figure exactly, but it was in the $200,000 a year range. And he back stiffened for a split second. And he says, okay, well, I like this and I like you. So I'm going to get this pushed through. And he buzzer under his desk, and the secretary came in. He said, get in the forms for the whatever applications. And she comes back with a stack about, I say, a foot tall, probably wasn't that tall, but it was more paperwork than people like me wanted. I'm a salesman. I'm not a detail person. Filling out a stack of papers was the last thing I wanted to do. He said, get these filled out and I'm going to push this through. And I said, okay, for my scheduling, what does push it through mean? How long are we talking about? And he says, I'm sure I can get this approved, signed, sealed, delivered in about 2 years. I said, 2 years? He said, well, this is a significant amount of money and a new concept. San Quentin is known as a hellhole. Now we're going to do positive thinking and personal development and so on. It's going to take a little selling, but I'll get it done. Within 2 years, you can bank on it. I said, what if we did it for free? And he said, oh, we could start this afternoon. And about an
Well,
hour late,
yeah.
he got on the microphone. And about an hour later, I was standing in the Jewish chapel at San Quentin. What is the Jewish chapel? At San Quentin, with about 200 or 300 people who'd heard the announcement and were willing to give up some of their personal time to get better, and giving them the deal about why they ought to join People Builders. It was the first time I'd ever said the words out loud, except to Warden Nelson. And so it filled the room. The room was never not filled. So I'm, 100, 150 people every Friday night for the next 5 years. And which led me, I sent you a long time ago a list of some of the famous people I've met. And one of the ones that people always zero in on was about 2/3 of the way down the front page, and it was Charlie Manson. I came
You
in
told
one
me
day.
that. I have to tell you, and I shared this with you at the time.
Mhm.
I did what we call in the Deep South a whole body frisson, which means I just shivered from my hairline to my toes. I almost threw up on my own feet when you said that.
He was an interesting character, not physically imposing. He's a little bitty
No,
guy.
you
I'd met,
tiny little guy. Yeah,
yeah,
but
I'd met,
nuts.
I'd met Sam. Yes, I'd met Sammy Davis Jr. and they reminded me just about the same size and build, and neither one of them was physically imposing. But I came in one night and Terry Wooster, the lieutenant who was in charge of making sure I could do anything I wanted to do, in essence, in the prison. I had amazing freedom, unguarded, unescorted. I could go anywhere in the prison but death row, and I could go there. But there they said, be sure you take a guard with you, a correctional officer with you. I never went in death row. I just never felt right about staring at people in cages who back then were going to die for actually executing people. They haven't done that in years in California. This being assigned to death row nowadays just means you're going to be in a cell block that has that name. You're not really on death row. But he said, I've got somebody who wants to meet you. And I said, well, who's that, Terry? And he said, well, he's looking at us right now because he's in the adjustment center. That was like junior college to death row. You probably ought to be on death row, but technically you didn't deserve, or you had won an appeal and gotten taken off death row, but nobody wanted to play with you anyway. So you were in the adjustment center, locked down 24 hours a day. And so on. He said, that's how he knew of you. He'd see you come in on Friday night, be greeted by a couple hundred people, and then Saturday morning he'd see you leave with a couple hundred people saying goodbye, and he got fascinated. I said, okay, because I had originally said, he said, I have an inmate who wants to meet you. I said, come down. He said, or come over. And he said, this one can't. Well, it turned out it was Charlie Manson, and right across the walkway outside, and then there's a gap, and then there's the gun rails. From his cell, you could look out one of the small windows over the gun rail, and your view was the front door of the Jewish chapel. So I had been his entertainment for a year or two. And he says, Charlie Manson. And I said, okay. He said, does that bother you? And I said, no, it doesn't bother me. It's fascinating. I'll add it to my list of stories. So I then visited with Charlie 3 times, 3 hours each time. People ask me, how'd you know that? How do you know it was 3 hours? Because I, by that time, was used to prison life. And I knew that you don't go in while there's a count going on. And you want to be out of there before the next count 4 hours later, because if it doesn't clear, you're frozen in place. And I didn't want to spend the night in Charlie Manson's cell or anybody else's cell. So I would go in after the count cleared and before the next one. That came out to roughly 3 hours. I spent 3 hours each of 3 times, total of 9 hours, sitting knee to knee with Charlie Manson in his cell, me on a little folding metal chair, him sitting on his bunk. And funny thing about that, I know I've told you, but your listeners probably don't know. When I walked into his cell, he used this top bunk as a bookshelf, a storage area, because nobody wanted to sleep with Charlie Manson. I could sort of see why.
No.
Uh,
Or
and,
eat with him or, do anything
or
else.
be his friend or
No.
anything. Yeah. So he had some couple of extra pairs of pants up there and one book in his whole cell. One book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And I said, God, what an interesting selection. Are you allowed to check books in and out? And so he said, no, that is my book and it stays with me. It's my Bible. I couldn't have built the Manson family without it. For me, that was a great lesson in learning and or being reminded that you can use something for good or evil. You can use a gun to protect your house from the bad people, or you can use a gun to kill your family. Charlie took that book, which has changed the lives of millions of people for a positive, and used it to figure out how to manipulate people and how to go over into the Haight-Ashbury or San Francisco and recruit from young people wandering around. I told Jimmy Rucker, my running buddy, greatest salesperson I ever personally worked with, I said, Jimmy, be glad we were not in Haight-Ashbury when we were 18, 19, didn't know our head from our rear ends, and we're wandering around trying to find ourselves. If we had been, there's a distinct chance we'd have been part of the Manson family. Because I'm telling you, he was persuasive. And the people that he recruited, Tex Watson is still in prison, came from an upper middle class family. He was educated, all things. He's an educator now in prison, but he wound up in Sharon Tate's house thanks to the manipulative power of Charlie Manson. So People Builders led me and I talked in other prisons and started doing a lot of more speaking as a result of People Builders. People wanted to be with a guy who went into San Quentin and looked death in the eye, that type of thing. And it helped lead to me giving 5,000 plus paid speeches or appearances because people wanted to hear about it. What was Charlie Manson like, and so on. A cute story about People Builders. A lot of the staff went through it. Some of the staff's family went through it. The only rule was when you came in the room, if you were staff, you were no longer Lieutenant Booster, you were Terry, and you got nothing extra thrown your way that the other inmates in the room didn't get. So it was they sort of got to see the other side of what they were doing. So one day I'm sitting at home, again within sight of the smokestack of San Quentin, and I'm reading that 4 or 5 people had found a way to go under one of the cell blocks, poke a hole in the wall, and over time dig a tunnel that was going to put them out into San Francisco Bay, and they had people that were going to meet them there and they'd be gone. It was a fascinating construction project, but somehow they lost faith in their direction and all. Maybe they thought they were going to get to the bay quicker than they did. So they tunneled up and created a little flap in the what turned out to be the grass. They didn't know that, so they could lift it up and look around and see where they were, or see if it was just time to go. Well, when they lifted up the little flap of grass, it was right next to the guard's snack bar when they came out of the prison and want to have a bite or whatever. So there's a couple, three guards sitting at a table, and out of the peripheral vision, they see this flap of grass rise up and a face looking at them from under the grass. And that was the end of their tunneling out experience. When I read the story in the
When you
paper
told me
that
that the first time, I'm thinking whack-a-mole. These guys are these guys are armed. They could have just reached out and batted them right back into the ground.
when I came in the next Friday after that happened, bumped right into Lieutenant Wooster, and I said, Terry, uh, were any people builders involved in that escape, that failed escape? He said, no, Ben, if they were people builders, they'd have made it. He had great pride in being a
Right.
member of an organization built on success. Little side note for to be a little closer to selling. When I got to San Quentin, the recidivism rate was 67%. It meant 67% of the people they let go finished out their term, whatever, were back in prison within 2 years. The graduates of people builders had a recidivism rate of less than 5%. So we cut the recidivism rate from 67% to 5% of those who went to the class and went through at least one 12-week cycle. We had people who were with us the whole 5 years. They do the 12-week cycle, graduate, do it again, do it again, do it again. It was part of their life and their family. But a lot of lives were changed as a result, and indirectly still are being. When I went to see Red Nelson that first day, San Quentin was the place in the entire United States penal system you didn't want to go. Maybe that and Sing Sing in New York. You just didn't want to go. There was nothing there but abuse and boredom and fights and gangs and so on. It was like the worst neighborhood you ever read about, with 3,200 people, I think it was then. And we started our class, and then people on the staff and the ward and all started to see the results. And some of my people said, well, why can't we have a computer class, or why can't we have a this class, and so on. Now it's been 50 years since I walked out the gate for the last time. Now San Quentin is a place you want to get to if you're incarcerated in California, because there you can get trained. They have television classes, how to work behind the camera, in front of the camera. They've had a radio station there for years, uh, and computer classes and programming classes, what you call, where you write up code, coding classes, and so on. And I'm sure they're on the cutting edge of artificial intelligence and so on. So we took it, and I'm not taking credit for it, but I do know where it started. People builders began San Quentin becoming a training ground instead of a hellhole. And to this day, I'm sort of proud of that. I saw a thing
Yeah,
that,
you should be. I think our prison here in Angola prison, it's
oh yeah, that's,
on the side of a huge plantation and it's beautiful. I
yep,
know no, but people say, what do you mean it's beautiful? It's beautiful because every prisoner in there works. They're herding cows. They're working with dogs. They're working in the fields. They're doing the rodeo. They work. And
landscaping.
landscaping is phenomenal.
Yeah,
I love to, every year I go to the Angola Prison Rodeo just so I can look around.
it is, again, like San Quentin, Angola
Right.
was not a goal in your life.
It's one
When
of
I
the
was,
worst in the country.
yeah, it was horrible.
It
But,
really was. But I wanted to go back to people builders really quickly, and I've written
mhm.
this down a couple times. When and I'm going to go back to Dale Carnegie. Had he passed away, or did he ever know that Charles Manson took his book and used it as a Bible.
I don't know whether he
God,
did
I
or
hope he
not.
didn't. I
Yeah,
hope he didn't.
yeah. Well, he was. I didn't know him, but a good friend of mine was a good friend of his, Merle Frazier. And in fact, somewhere in my office, I have photocopies of the handwritten notes that Dale Carnegie wrote to do the book. And Merle, I guess, has the original pages because he sent me not the whole book, but pages from the notes to write it. So he knew it, but I don't know, and it's never been a real subject of discussion between Merle and me. I sort of doubt it. Uh, I met Manson's dead now. He died a couple of years ago at age 80, and had just gotten married. He was starting to settle down. I'm being facetious.
Ick, 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 ick.
With those zombies who used to sit outside the prison staring at the
Oh,
fence, waiting for his return. I remember thinking, I never said anything to them because they were nuts. But I remember thinking, I ought to say to him, he's not coming out, ladies. What are you waiting for? You know, sitting at
have
the
a
chain link
hamburger.
fence. Yeah.
Yeah, go eat something. I wanted to ask you too, and I'm going back to people builders because I know we're running out of time. Didn't your adopted son graduate from that program?
Yeah.
Or am I
Well,
thinking of something different?
no, my real biological son uh, visited it several times. He never went through the 12-week cycle,
Right.
but we went to a football game, inmate football game one day on they call it the ranch, the open area, if you can get out of the gate because of your custody level, whatever. Went to a game and they put him in the game. And I'm guessing he was 12 years old or something. And he scored several touchdowns because one team, which was made up of gang members, told the other team, when Mr. Gay's son has the ball, you don't tackle him. So young Ben scored several touchdowns because people were afraid to mess with him. A story about being institutionalized. There was a guy there named Crazy Horse Taylor. He was an inmate, and he was famous because a guard named Officer Evans got slashed in the throat, ear to ear. Well, you stay out of guard stabbings and so on if you want to live. And so he probably was destined to bleed out in the prison yard. But Officer Evans was a good guy. He wasn't out to make their lives miserable or anything. He played it fair and square. Crazy Horse picked him up and ran him across the main yard to the infirmary or the whatever. I don't know the medical names of the rooms, but ran him to, and he survived. But with a big red gash from ear to ear scar. And they decided he shouldn't work in the prison anymore. So he went down to the East Gate. It was Officer Evans who greeted me every night when I came in and most mornings when I left. And he was revered in the prison. One, because he was a good guy. Two, he'd survived that. And he didn't do anything to the people who did it to him. The institution probably did, but he wasn't at the forefront of, let's get them back. Just a good guy. So I was talking to Crazy Horse Taylor one day, and I said, that took some real courage. Where'd you get that courage? He said, it was the right thing to do. And that was the beginning and end of his explanation. And I said, hey, you seem to have adjusted. What's the worst thing about being in prison? He said, for me, now we're talking about institutionalization. He said, for me, the worst time ever in prison. I used to go out. I have a Corvette. I keep at my sister's house. I'd go out, drive the car around, have a good time, chase the ladies, and then I'd commit a parole violation so I could get back home. And home to him was San Quentin
Oh
with,
my.
with all my friends and everything. So
Right.
I said, you said you were going to tell me about the worst thing that ever happened. He said, well, the worst thing was I was out. I'd had my time. It was time to go back. But I didn't check the population because in this area, when I get arrested again, they send you to the Alameda County Jail. And from there, you get processed back to San Quentin. I didn't check what was going on. It turned out there was a staff strike at the Alameda County Jail, so they couldn't process me as fast as they should have. The worst week or so ever in my prison life, and he'd been in and out for 30 years, was I didn't get home for Christmas. I was stuck in the Alameda County Jail. And I thought, wow, you seem like not a
Home
normal
being
person.
home
Yeah,
being the prison,
yeah,
not his
yeah,
sister's
yeah,
house. That's amazing.
yeah. But he was totally, I'd heard the term and I sort of understood it. You're comfortable there. It's like walking with a rock in your shoe. After a while, you get used to it and miss the rock if it falls out for a while. But that was the moment I thought, oh, now I know what institutionalized is. Your sad time when you can't get back to prison in time for Christmas. Sue,
I don't
that
even know
was,
what to think about that. That boggles my poor little cold addled brain.
yeah, well, it did mine too, except I've been around different situations like that for so long that almost nothing shocks me anymore. I try and learn from the experience and study it, but I don't let it bother me like it used to. It used to be. I was walking across the main yard one day and at San Quentin, and I don't know what they were fighting about, but some fight broke out, which led to the deaths. I'm making up numbers of like 12 or 13 people, including two correctional officers, and so on. Blood everywhere, people yelling, screaming, running around, and uh, they broke that up, and I went about my business and went to the class and taught it for 12 hours. Went home, and I don't know, it was 2 or 3 days later, Marcia, my first wife, read in the paper about this thing and all the people dead and everything. She said, were you there when that was going on? I said, yeah, I was. She said, you didn't mention it. I said, huh, that's interesting. My point being, I had seen enough of that type of thing not to be amazed by it anymore. Speaking of amazed by, I sat one time, said I told you I've never been to death row, but I did sit in the chair in the gas chamber. I said, I wonder what that's like, what the experience is. And they took me in there and showed me and how the guy lifts this lever and it lowers the cyanide tablets into the acid outside of it's just looks like a enlarged phone booth, about 10 times the size of a normal phone booth. So I said, I'd like to sit in there and just see what that's like. And he said, well, I'll put you in there and strap you down. So they did. And I sat in this horrible uh, iron chair. I guess it was steel, something. They strapped down my hands, got outside the thing, looking back at me at the glass. He nodded to somebody behind me. That guy raised the lever which would have lowered if they'd been there, the cyanide tablets into the acid. And then they threw a microphone were saying, and now the vapors will be hitting your mouth and so and so. So I got up and I said, well, that's an interesting experience. And went about my day, taught the class or went to have breakfast with them or something. And about 2 or 3 nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night at home yelling, scared Marcia to death. And it was a nightmare about being gassed in the gas chamber at San Quentin. And I had dreams similar to that about it for several years. In fact, I was even thinking about going to a psychologist, but a friend of mine who's a human behavioral scientist said, we don't really do dreams. We can do interpretation of dreams. And the interpretation of your dream is you went through the mental exercise of being killed in the gas chamber. So you'll either outgrow it or you won't. So that was sort of the end of it. And I haven't had that dream in many years. Talking to you about it today will probably bring it back. So I'll tell Gigi tonight if I start screaming in the middle of the night, I'm having my gas chamber uh,
Call me
recreation
and I
or
can yell at you.
yeah.
I'll be happy to step in and start making some noise.
So
Before I let
all
you
this,
go, tell
uh
tell us very quickly about your son.
Well, I have four.
No,
Which
you're
one do you want to know about?
the one that you adopted who is now an attorney.
Oh, you're talking about Lamont Bowens.
Lamont, yes.
Lamont, yeah. He has a book that if you're listening, you ought to get your hands on. It's at Amazon, I'm sure, called Don't Let Your Past Hold You Back. The Redemption of a Gangster. I just
Yep,
talked to him
I
two
have
or
it.
3 days ago, by the way. He called, and when I answered, I didn't have the call indicator on. So I said hello, and he said, Dad, and I paused for a second. Well, I'm estranged from one of my sons. One is dead, the other one's in the backyard in our guest house. And he calls me Ben, not Dad. He's not my biological son. So of the four that I started out with, Lamont's the only one that calls me Dad. I said, Lamont Bowens, how are you? This is great. Well, I met Lamont. He came to a people builders class that I was teaching at Lompoc Federal Penitentiary. Walked up to me outside the classroom. I had been told weeks before that he would probably introduce himself, but he never came. And he said, I've been trying to get up the courage to come meet you, and I want to go to the class. I said, well, you're Lamont Bowens. He said, how do you know? I said, I've been waiting for you for weeks. Lamont that night was 19 years old, virtually uneducated. He probably went to the eighth or ninth grade. Was in there for dealing drugs, finishing up, as best I recall, a 5 or 6 year sentence in federal prison at 19, if you can imagine. Uh, well, maybe he was just sort of, I don't think you can be there before you're 18. So he was probably 2 years deep in a 5 year sentence. And he said, I'd like to go to the class as long as I don't have to speak. I said, you don't have to speak if you don't want to. So we went in, it was held in the cafeteria at the federal prison camp in Lompoc. Walked in the side door, which put us at the front of the group, which was already gathered. There were a couple hundred people in there. And they looked up because I was there. And I've got my arm around Lamont. And I said, there was one lady in the room, one of the chief cooks. So I said, lady and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to someone you probably all know, but he's going to be our first speaker tonight. And I could feel his shoulders tense, and he's a solid guy. And I said, Lamont Bowens is going to speak to us tonight and tell us why he's here and what he's doing and so and so. And I stepped back. He got a little mild round of applause. And he only talked for 4 or 5 minutes, but I think I've told you those 4 or 5 minutes were as good as Martin Luther King Jr. Not for what he said, not the content so much, but the power of the way he said it. And I'm going to turn my life around, and I'm going to help you turn your life around, and so on. And then I remember he ended with, so let's get busy. And he sat down and he got a spontaneous, instant standing ovation. So the reason he wrote a book is because he's become successful in the meantime. I talked to him the other day. His office, he's a lawyer now. His office is 1 block from the White House on 16th Avenue. And he's doing extremely well, has traveled all over the world. He sent me a picture not too long ago to Gigi and me, he calls us mom and dad. Sent us a picture from Dubai, and he was on a camel. And I'm thinking, boy, that's a long way from the
Yeah,
parking lot
you
at
shared that with
uh,
me. I thought that was an amazing image.
uh, so anyway, doing extremely well, and happy we met. And it all goes back. He says it really goes back to him. I saw a winner in him as soon as I met him, but it all goes back to him and public speaking at People Builders. And that's one of the secrets, by the way, of the work that I did there. I saw a thing on television the other day where they're doing Macbeth and so on, but the inmates were the actors, and they were talking about it turned my life around and it did this. And I said, that's People Builders with Shakespeare thrown in. I just use public speaking because if you can get somebody to develop confidence in anything, it changes their life. And public speaking is something just about anybody can do. They stand around and talk to their friends. So all you have to do is get them to do that in front of a large group, and you're off and running. So Lamont Bowens is one of
Same
those
thing
things
about
that,
podcasting.
yeah,
Podcasting is marketing 101. I've said it a hundred
absolutely.
times. I'll keep on saying it.
Yep. I haven't looked in this book in a while. It says to Ben, thank you for being my mentor. I owe you so much for my success. Always be blessed. Love you, and Lamont Bowens. He autographed with the book when it first came out. This is June 25th, 2018. But his life turned around. Gigi said of all the work he did at San Quentin and Lompoc, so in total about 11 years, grand total, and some of the other little prisons along the way. She said if all you got out of it was Lamont Bowens, it was worth every minute. And when I think of all those nights and all those hours, I have many friends from that era and many success stories, but Lamont always comes to my mind and I can see his face. Um, and Lamont and I get the biggest kick out of doing the father son trick because I'm from the South. I can turn on, like you, I can turn on my Southern accent. Therefore, and I'm of a certain age, therefore, I'm obviously a segregationist and a racist and a this, all the stuff that comes with people who don't know the South like you and I do. And then I say, and this is my son, Lamont. And Lamont is just about as dark as anyone you ever met, and a wonderful guy. And people, you see him, they look at Lamont, they look at me, they look back at Lamont. And I said, yeah, I said son. And Lamont will hug me and say, yep, this is my dad. His mother and dad are physically gone, so he doesn't
Right.
feel bad about calling us mom and dad. But great guy, and I suggest you get the book. Don't let your past hold you back. The Redemption of a Gangster, and he is redeemed.
Honestly, that's one of my very favorite stories that you share. It really is. We are out of time, and I
Darn,
hate that. I know. So listen, everybody, this is the closers podcast for 2024. But we will be back raring to go in the first week of January in 2025. And we look forward to seeing you there. So, Ben, I'm not going to even ask where people can find us. They know where to find us. I'm just going to say goodbye and wish you and Gigi a lovely Christmas and a happy New Year.
the same to you. Take care, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you for letting me talk about my favorite subject, me.
See, I would have never guessed. All right, everybody, thank you so much. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. I don't really like to say happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. And we will be back soon. Be back soon. I can't even talk. Thank you, Ben. Love you.
Love you.